Welcome to the final installment of the Comprachicos. Today we're still in college, but finishing up there. And remember, please, this was written in 1970. In the avalanche of commentaries on the campus riots, a great deal has been said about the students as if those manifestations of savagery were spontaneous, and about the college administrators as if their policies of abject appeasement were repressive. But very little is said about the faculties. Yet it is the faculty that causes, inspires, manipulates, and often stage manages the riots. In some cases, the majority of the faculty supports the rioters. In others, it is a small Comprachico minority that overpowers the faculty majority by spitting in its face. And if you want to see a negative demonstration of the power of ideas, i.e., a demonstration of what happens to men devoid of philosophical convictions, take a look at the cringing moral cowardice of allegedly civilized scholars in the presence of a handful of faculty hooligans. There have been notable exceptions to this attitude, but not many. For several generations, the destruction of reason was carried on under the cover and in the name of reason, which was the Kant, Hegel, James Dewey method. When every girder of rationality had been undercut, a new philosophy made explicit what had been implicit and took over the job of providing a rationalization of the student's psychoepistemological state: existentialism. Now, let's think for a moment about Evergreen. Let's think about Evergreen out in Washington. If you don't know the full story of Evergreen, I encourage you to go watch it on Benjamin Boyce's channel. Watch the whole thing and then hearken back to this. Existentialism elevates chronic anxiety into the realm of metaphysics. Fear, misery, nausea, it declares, are not an individual's fault. They are inherent in human nature. They're an intrinsic, predestined part of the human condition. Action is the sole alleviation possible to man. What action? Any action. You do not know how to act? Don't be chicken. Courage consists in acting without knowledge. You do not know what goals to choose? There are no standards of choice. Virtue consists in choosing a goal by whim and sticking to it, committing yourself to the grim death. It sounds unreasonable? Reason is man's enemy. Your guts, muscles, and blood know best. For several generations, the destruction of freedom, i.e., of capitalism, was carried on under the cover and in the name of freedom. The genteel intellectual conformists, mass-produced in colleges, proclaimed every collectivist tenet, premise, and slogan, while professing their abhorrence of dictatorship. When every girder of capitalism had been undercut, when it had been transformed into crumbling mixed economy, i.e., a state of civil war among pressure groups fighting politely for the legalized privilege of using physical force, the road was cleared for a philosopher who scrapped the politeness and the legality, making explicit what had been implicit. Herbert Marcuse, the avowed enemy of reason and freedom, the advocate of dictatorship, of mystic insight, of retrogression to savagery, of universal enslavement, of rule by brute force. Someone told me last night in my Zoom call for my locals community that he had a conversation once with someone who was criticizing capitalism and saying they preferred socialism. And he asked, do you know what socialism means? Do you know what it is? That you own the means of production. The government owns the means of production. And the student or whoever he was speaking with said, yes, that's great. He said, well, what do you think are the means of production? The student said, well, the factories. He said, no, the people, the labor, the human beings who make all that work. That's the means of production. A factory doesn't function without people. Even a fairly automated factory doesn't function after a while without people. So owning the means of production means owning the people. It is a form of slavery. The student activists are the Comprachicos' most successful products. They went obediently along every step of the way, never challenging the basic premises inculcated in the progressive nursery schools. They act in packs with the will of the pack as their only guide. This scramble for power among their pack leaders and among different packs does not make them question their premises. They are incapable of questioning anything. I'm going to stop there even though I'm not yet through a paragraph because I made a video earlier today that I uploaded and it had a teacher, he had a mullet. If you're looking for which one, it's the last video about critical pedagogy. And the guy in the little video wearing the mullet fits this to a T. I honestly don't believe he has the capacity to question any of his premises. As I was listening to him and asking questions into the video camera, I thought to myself, it would be pointless to ask this man these questions. I don't mean to sound condescending. It wasn't there behind his eyes. I didn't see any true understanding of what he was saying. It was like he was just repeating back slogans and talking points he'd heard. And I sincerely believe if we asked him about some of his statements, would he be able to, address them with any degree of nuance? I don't think he could. I don't think he could do it. I could be wrong, but I've tried asking those questions of people who are, by their own definition, woke, and they just sort of stare blankly back at you. Like, what do you mean? And then repeat whatever they just said. And I think that's what she's talking about. So they cling to the belief that mankind can be united into one happily, harmoniously unanimous pack by force. Brute physical force is to them a natural form of action. Philosophically, it is clear that when men abandon reason, physical force becomes their only means of dealing with one another and of settling disagreements. The activists are the living demonstration of this principle. I'm going to stop again. Today, I spent about an hour and a half watching a webinar put out by the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education. And throughout, I heard people who, if I'm going to be generous, I'll say they meant well, but I'm not really usually that generous. I think they have a political agenda, but never mind. Listening to them, it was clear they absolutely believe, every single panelist absolutely believes that utopia is just one bureaucratic decision away. Just if they could just analyze the data correctly, and if they could just spend money in the right way, and if they could just provide for all the needs of every individual in the system in the exact right way that they need it, and make sure that those who have less get more than those who have more. They said that literally. I'm going to do a live stream on it at the end of the week, so you can tune in and watch. But you could see in their eyes this sense of urgency and passion that if we just, it's there, we can achieve it. We can just, kind of coerce human beings into perfection, and we can have everybody achieve equity, which I guess in their imagination is everybody doing well, equally well. If we just do these things and fully commit ourselves and violate a few of the, laws in our Constitution, like states' rights and how we appropriate funds and a few other things, parental rights included, whatever. I mean, they didn't say these things explicitly, but some of the programs they wanted to push for, some of the things they'd like to add to the agenda are clearly unconstitutional. They're just, you're listening to them talk and it's like, if only, you're saying, if only we could coerce everyone is what you're saying. But they don't say it that way. They just say perfection is there for us to create, if only. So she saw it in 1970. This lives on. The only thing that protects us from people with this philosophy, because they will always be there. Utopians have been around for millennia. They've always been there. They will always be there. The only thing protects the individual and individual rights, the smallest minority, the individual, is the kind of law we've had in the United States, where each individual has the same political rights as every other individual. When you're literally equal under the law, and somebody can't decide that they have a project that necessitates you being slightly less equal, some animals more equal than others, when that law protects you no matter what, it's like, sorry, I don't care how awesome your end goal is. I don't care how noble your aims are. I don't care how much you want to live in a world that looks like that. You cannot oppress someone else, no matter what they look like, no matter how much they physically resemble some people from the past who maybe were a little bit oppressive. It doesn't matter. You can't do that. There's no good end to be pursued by being evil. But these people don't understand it. They truly don't understand it. Okay? The activists claim that they have no way of attracting attention to their demands and of getting what they want except by force. Heard that a lot today, by the way. By violent demonstrations, obstruction, and destruction is a pure throwback to the progressive nursery school where a tantrum was the only thing required to achieve their wishes. Their hysterical screaming still carries a touch of pouting astonishment at a world that does not respond to an absolute such as I want it. The 3-year-old whim worshiper becomes the 20-year-old thug. They literally said today, speak to the students. The students know what they need. No, the students know what they want. You don't ask a young child what they need to be educated to function in the world. They don't know what they need. They know what they want. And of course, what did we hear? We heard, well, they said they're having trouble getting to school because sometimes their parents have to choose between the money for the bus and the money for food at home. So we provided free transportation. Well, hooray. You didn't provide it. The taxpayers of your city provided it. And that means that the parents who had to make that choice were not in any way, shape, or form incentivized to maybe solve that problem for their own family. It's now become the role of the state. It's something they absolutely must respond to because the student said, we need it. We want it. And as much as you might feel sorry for them, because it certainly isn't the fault of the child, at some point, we have to stand up for the rights of the people who end up paying for that bus, who also work and also have children, possibly, and not just give everybody what they want because they want it. And because, well, they need it. And you have it and they don't. Yeah, I have it because I worked for it. It didn't just magically fall in my lap. So this idea is fresh. It's as fresh today as it was then, as it is in the nursery school when it's like, I want your toy and you have a toy and I don't have a toy. And you have 2 toys and I have 0 toys. You have to give me your toys. It doesn't matter that I have 2. It doesn't matter I have 100. You don't get to demand one of my toys. That's not how it works. That's just not how it works. You don't get to oppress me because you feel oppressed, because that's not oppression. There's a difference. So this is, and while they've figured out today in our bureaucracies not to be violent, everything they're talking about in, very nice language and how they want to spend money. And we need to invest. They don't say spend. We need to invest in this and invest in that. And we need to offer this and give that. But behind every offering, behind every investment, has to come a taking. Has to come a taking from someone else's investments. I don't get to invest my earnings the way I would like to because the government's going to come along and tell me how they've chosen to do it for me. And almost always it's in someone else's needs, not my own, not those of my children. So all of their nice talk about investments and removing barriers and providing and giving and nurturing and supporting is taking and undermining and removing support from the people who are going to be coerced into paying for it. It's just a softer, gentler way of coercing. The activists are a small minority, but they are confronting a helpless, confused, demoralized majority consisting of those who are unable to fully accept the school conditioning or fully to reject it. Among them, a large group represents the activist fellow travelers and prospective converts, the hippies. The hippies froze in the progressive nursery school level and went no further. They took the progressive nursery's metaphysics literally and are now wandering in search of a world to fit it. The hippies' lifestyle is an exact concretization of the nursery's ideal. No thought, no focus, no purpose, no work. No reality save the whim of the moment. The hypnotic monotony of primitive music with the even beat that deadens the brain and the senses. The brotherhood of the pack combined with pretensions and expressing individuality at doing one's thing. In the haze and stench of grimy coffee houses, which thing consists in the monotonous repetition of the same jerking contortions with the same long whine of sounds that have been emitted by others for days on end. The inarticulate extolling of emotions above reason, of spirituality above matter, of nature above technology, and above all the quest for love, anyone's love, any kind of love, as the key to finding someone who will take care of them. Clinging to their nursery ideal, the hippies live down to its essential demand, non-effort. If they are not provided with brightly furnished rooms and toys, they live in dank basements, they sleep on floors, they eat what they find in garbage cans, they breed stomach ulcers and spread venereal diseases, anything rather than confront that implacable enemy of whims, reality. And out of those variants of progressive education's results, out of the spectacle of human self-degradation, there rises a grim, factual, unanswerable proof of the place of reason in man's nature and existence. As a silent warning to all Comprachicos and their allies, you can destroy men's minds, but you will not find a substitute. You can condition men to irrationality, but you cannot make them bear it. You can deprive men of reason, but you cannot make them live with what's left. That proof and warning is drugs. The most damning refutation of the theories of all hippie activist Marcusian hordes is the drug-glazed eyes of their members. Men who have found the right way of life do not seek to escape from awareness, to obliterate their consciousness, and to drug themselves out of existence. Drug addiction is the confession of an unbearable inner state. Drugs are not an escape from economic or political problems. They're not an escape from society, but from oneself. They're an escape from the undurable state of a living being whose consciousness has been crippled, deformed, mutilated, but not eliminated, so that its mangled remnants are screaming that he cannot go on without it. The phenomenon of an entire generation turning to drugs is such an indictment of today's culture, of its basic philosophy and its educational establishment, that no further evidence is necessary and no lesser causal explanation is possible. And I don't mean to come off sounding judgy or preachy. I'm just saying that I think we live in times to this day that create a kind of emptiness, and the desire to fill that emptiness with something fuels some of this activism. So I think some of it is political. I think some of it is spiritual and emotional, that there's something just void inside. And then when you add drugs to it and you add tribalism to it or identitarianism to it and all these things, you end up with a kind of cult-like devotion to all of these things outside yourself to deaden the pain inside yourself. If they had not been trained to believe that belonging to a pack is a moral and metaphysical necessity, would high school children risk the physical destruction of their brains in order to belong to a pot-smoking in-group? If they had not been trained to believe that reason is impotent, would college students take mind-expanding drugs to seek some higher means of cognition? If they had not been trained to believe that reality is an illusion, would young persons take drugs to reach a higher reality that seems to obey their wishes, except that they are smashed on pavements and attempting to fly out of windows? If a trained pack of commentators sharing the same beliefs did not glamorize the obscene epidemic of self-destruction by means of such estimates as idealistic, revolutionary, new lifestyle, new morality, drug culture, would the young have any cover left to hide their own deep knowledge that drug addiction is nothing but a public confession of personal impotence? Now add physical self-mutilation in the form of trans ideology. And again, we're talking about the difference between people who are trans and you really don't hear anything from them. They just go on about the business, right? And the ideology, the kind of people who have to be all up in your business to justify their business. And they are physically mutilating themselves and encouraging the physical mutilation of others, especially children. And there's something about that is in here, what she's talking about. This personal impotence. You don't go running around the world telling other people to be like you, or saying that if somebody doesn't validate your decisions, they hate you and want to kill you, unless there's something very dark inside of you. There's something missing. It is the educational establishment that has created this national disaster. I agree, and it's still the case today. It is philosophy that has created the educational establishment. Also agree. The anti-rational philosophic trend of the past 200 years has run its course and reached its climax. That was 1970. I'm sorry, Ayn, I don't think it's reached its climax. I think we're getting there, though. I hope we don't go any farther. I hope we've reached the top. Appeals to home, church, mother, and tradition will not do. They never did. Ideas can be fought only by means of ideas. The educational establishment has to be fought from bottom to top, from cause to consequences, from nursery schools to universities, from basic philosophy to campus riots, from without and from within. This last is addressed to the many intelligent youths who are aware of the state of higher education and refuse to go to college, or having gone, drop out in revulsion. They are playing into the Comprachicos' hands. If the better minds desert the universities, the country will reach a situation in which the incompetent and the second-rate will carry the official badge of the intellect, and there will be no place for the first-rate and independent to function or even to hide. To preserve one's mind intact through a modern college education is a test of courage and endurance, but the battle is worth it and the stakes are the highest possible to man, the survival of reason. The time spent in college is not wasted. If one knows how to use the Comprachicos against themselves, one learns in reverse by subjecting their theories to the most rigorously critical examination and discovering what is false and why, what is true, what are the answers. Now, I'm going to stop there and disagree with her. That may have been true in the 70s. In fact, I know it was true. You still could find professors who would at least allow you to voice your opinions and ask questions in class and have viewpoint diversity. You would be protected from bullying students who sought to cancel you and prevent you from ever getting a job and things like that. The risks were not what they are today. The risks today are real. They are, in some respects, existential. You could be physically attacked. Possibly worse. So you really have to think carefully about how worth it is to you. Is there a goal you have that requires college? Because also in 1970, things were very different in terms of what you were going to do when you got out of school and, how many things you needed to have a degree for if you were of this level of academic achievement. You can be as smart as the people she's talking about now and go on and pursue a lot of goals without going to college. That wasn't necessarily the case in 1970. So I disagree. I agree with her for the time period. I disagree that this applies to now. So I want you, the listener, to understand that I'm not reading this saying this still holds true. I think any intelligent, rational person should seriously question whether they need to go to college, not least because the cost is outrageous. As to the drugged contingents of hippies and activists, I should like to address the following to those among them who may still be redeemable, as well as to those who may be tempted to join their hordes. The modern Comprachicos have an advantage over their ancient predecessors. When a victim was mutilated physically, he retained the capacity to discover who had done it. But when a victim is mutilated mentally, he clings to his own destroyers as his masters and his only protectors against the horror of the state which they have created. He remains as their tool and their plaything, which is part of their racket. That is so true and true to this day. If in the chaos of your motives some element is genuine desire to crusade in a righteous cause and take part in a heroic battle directed against the proper enemy, yes, the world is in a terrible state, but what caused it? Capitalism? Where do you see it, except for some battered remnants that still manage to keep us all alive? Yes, today's establishment is a rotted structure of mindless hypocrisy, but who and what is the establishment? Who directs it? Not the big businessmen who mouth the same collectivist slogans as your professors and pour out millions of dollars to support them. Still true to this day. Not the so-called conservatives who compete with your professors in attacking reason and in spreading the same collectivist altruist mystic notions. Not the Washington politicians who are the eager dummies of your professional ventriloquists. Not the communications media who publicize your cause, praise your ideals, and preach your professors' doctrines. Again, same today. It is ideas that determine the actions of those people. And it is the educational establishment that determines the ideas of a nation. It is your professors' ideas that have ruled the world for the past 50 years or longer, with a growing spread of devastation, not improvement. And today, in default of opposition, these ideas are destroying the world as they destroyed your mind and self-esteem. You are miserably helpless and want to rebel, then rebel against the ideas of your teachers. You will never find a harder, nobler, or more heroic form of rebellion. You have nothing to lose but your anxiety. You have your mind to win. In conclusion, I should like to quote for one of the guiltiest groups, the parents, a passage from Atlas Shrugged, which deals with Reardon's thoughts after the death of the wet nurse. He thought of all the living species that train their young in the art of survival, the cats who teach their kittens to hunt, the birds who spend such strident effort on teaching their fledglings to fly. Yet man, whose tool of survival is the mind, does not merely fail to teach a child to think, but devotes the child's education to the purpose of destroying his brain, of convincing him that thought is futile and evil before he has started to think. Men would shudder, he thought, if they saw a mother bird plucking the feathers from the wings of her young, then pushing him out of the nest to struggle for survival, yet that was what they did to their children. Armed with nothing but meaningless phrases, this boy had been thrown to fight for existence. He had hobbled and groped through a brief doomed effort, he had screamed his indignant, bewildered protest, and had perished in his first attempt to soar on his mangled wings. Written August through December 1970. Published in the New Left in the Anti-Industrial Revolution, 1970. So that concludes the Comprachicos. And that last bit was certainly powerful, but I hope, again, that you can see why I chose to read it to you and why I think it is well worth consideration, because so much of it still applies to this day. We didn't learn then, and here we are today. So it kind of makes you wonder, where will we be in 40 more years? Do you want to think about it? I don't. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel, like, comment, and share this video and this entire series with people you think might get something out of it. And I hope you will also consider joining my locals community. I have 2 Zoom calls a week where we talk about all things education. I hope you will consider joining this channel. It helps me bring you this content. And that's the video for today.